Hi guys! It is me, Ellen. Welcome to this video. This is my book wrap-up and I'm very excited to talk about it with you guys because I have read so many books in the past 2 months because I missed June, so we're combining June and July's book wrap-up. I did already film this, but I somehow didn't upload the footage to my computer, which I thought I did, and then I deleted the footage thinking it was uploaded. But it's not. So now I have to like refilm this. But hello, welcome to this very casual one. I usually do have a bookshelf behind me, but I did not feel like leaving my bed today. So we're gonna have it here. Very I'm also in my PJs, so a very casual book wrap up. So let's get started talking because I believe there are 18 books to talk about and I don't want this video to be super long. So let's just get started. I'm going to start with what I always start with, statistics. So I'm going to start with June statistics, then July statistics, and then we'll talk about the books all combined. I'm not going to be like, these are books I read in June and July. We're just combining it. So for June, I read a total of 7 books. 4 of them were hardcover, 3 of them were paperback. 4 were male authors, 2 were female authors, and 1 was both male and female. I read 2 books that came out in the year 2020 and 5 books that were backlisted. I read 3 adult books and 4 young adult books. So the shortest book I read was 152 pages and then the longest book I read was 517 pages. So total I read 2,184 pages, which averages to about like 72.8 pages a day. For genres, I read 3 contemporaries, 1 fantasy, 1 romance, 1 nonfiction, and 1 horror. The stars were pretty good this month. I had 1 2.5 star, 2 3 stars, 1 4 star, and 3 4.5 stars, which averages to about 3.7 stars. So now let's move on to July, and in July I read 10 books, which I think might be my best month for the year so far. Very happy about it. 2 books were hardcover, 8 were paperback. I read 6 male authors and 4 female authors. I read 2 books that came out this year, 2020, and 8 books that were backlisted. I read 7 adult books and 3 young adult books. So the shortest book that I read was only 82 pages, but the longest book I read was 526 pages. So total I read 2,638 pages, which averages to about 85 pages a day. I read 1 poetry, 1 horror, 1 contemporary, 4 nonfiction, 1 historical fiction, 1 play, and 1 fantasy. The stars were also pretty good this month, so it's been a good quality the past 2 months. I read 1 1.5 star, 1 3 star, 5 4 stars, 1 4.5 star, and 2 5 stars. I forgot to do the math for the average, so I'll just put it here. Editing Ellen can do the math. Okay, so those are all the statistics. Let's move on to the books. And I think I'm going to start with the books that came out in 2020, the ones that I read. So the first one I have to talk about, we're starting off on a really good note. This was a fantastic book. But I read Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. This is his 4th novel, the 4th one of his that I've read. I really love his writing and I love his stories. So at this point, he is now an auto-buy author, so anytime he comes out with a book, I'm immediately buying it. And this one was so good. This involves like a haunted house, which I didn't even need to know any more than that going into it. But we follow this girl, Maggie Holt. We I will say this goes back and forth between different time periods, not time periods, but we go back and forth between Maggie as a child, like a 5-year-old living in this house with her parents, and Maggie as an adult where her dad has passed away and now she has inherited this house and she has to go back and try and fix it up so she can sell it. So basically what had happened was when she was 5 years old, living with her parents in this house, they only lasted, I think it was like 20 days in the house, and then they never went back ever again. And her dad wrote a memoir about what happened in that house and all the like ghostly hauntings and things that, whatever, like the creepy things that happened. And it became a huge bestseller, huge sensation. She has never believed that what's in the book is true. Because again, she was 5 years old, she doesn't really remember a lot of her time in that house. When she goes back and she's like living in this house again trying to fix it up, creepy things start happening again. And I love how Riley connects the book to what's happening in real life. So you see the connections. This had so many twists and turns. It was super creepy and eerie. Like, I loved the atmosphere. It was kind of scary to read at times, but I also kind of didn't mind it. I was engaged the entire time with the story. I thought the pacing was great, and it was just organized very well, going back and forth between the different times in her life, I guess. I did not see that ending coming. Usually with his books, I can never see how they're gonna end. They're always a shock. I always try and guess, and I always think I have it, and I'm like, I know it. It's this person this time. And then it switches on me. Yeah, so I did not see that ending coming. But oh boy, was it satisfying. I really loved this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The next one I'm going to talk about is All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. This is a young adult nonfiction memoir where George M. Johnson talks about his experience living and growing up as a Black queer man. I really enjoyed this book. I also really enjoyed this cover a lot. I think he like approaches his life and these stories in such an honest and raw way, and I love how he uses these stories to be like a mentor to the reader. I do think though that this book, even though I did enjoy it, I do think it's not particularly a book for me because he uses his stories as a mentorship. It feels like this is more for a reader who is a queer teen person. Like, again, not saying it's not good, I just think it would benefit those people more to read this book than it would have been it benefited me. And also, I don't know if it's because it's YA, but it does tend to repeat itself quite a bit and kind of like over-explain things to the point where I'm like, I get it. You didn't have to spell it out because I kind of got what you were saying. But overall, I did really enjoy this. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So the next 2020 book that I read was The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta. This is one I did not think I was going to read, but as soon as it came out, or like I saw it in the store and I picked it up, I was like, I need to read this right now. So I did, and I flew through it. It is told in verse, so it's a lot easier to just like be able to fly through it. But this is, I really liked this book as well. I think 2020 is coming out with some amazing books this year. So we follow Michael, who is a mixed race gay teen. He is growing up in London, and he's growing up like figuring out who he is, seeing how the world treats him, how society treats him. And he kind of finds himself through drag once he gets to college. And that's, yeah, it's just kind of a coming of age story in a sense, but I loved the aspect of drag. It was so cool. I also really loved the metaphor of the Black Flamingo that's used throughout this book. It's very powerful, very beautifully written as well. It did take a little while for me to get into it and to really connect with the character, but overall, I definitely think it's worth a read, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. And then the last 2020 book that I read is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. Okay, I'm gonna have to have a long conversation about this one. So, this is the prequel to The Hunger Games. A lot of people did not like this book, and I totally see why. But I actually kind of enjoyed it. I definitely had my issues with it, which I will talk about. But overall, I didn't hate this book. But in this prequel, we follow Coriolanus Snow, who is 18 at this time, and it's the 10th Hunger Games, and he becomes a mentor to the girl from the 12th district. And it's just about like that Hunger Games, but also about Coriolanus Snow and how, because in the Hunger Games series, Coriolanus Snow is the main villain. He is a horrible psychopath. And so we see him kind of make these choices and these decisions that lead to him being who he is in the Hunger Games series. And that's something I did enjoy. Yes, it's hard to read from his perspective because of what a psychopath he is, but I liked it as like a character study. So something about me, like if there's a villain in a story, I always love to know the backstory of the villain to try and figure out how this person came to be who they are, what choices did they make along the way? What choices, like what were the options for them? Whatever. And like why they made the choices they made and that led them to be a villain and have these points of view and whatnot. It's obviously not an excuse for Coriolanus Snow being the way he is, and it's not glorifying it, which was something I was really scared of about this book. I don't think it glorifies Coriolanus Snow at all. I just love seeing a character study of how Snow became Snow. Another thing I really loved about this book that I think was the best part about this book was the history of the Hunger Games, seeing how it was in the beginning and how it came to be the Hunger Games that we know it as from the series. I also loved a lot of the references to the series that's in here. The reference that I liked the most that I'll use as an example, but there's multiple of these things throughout the book. But the song, the Hanging Tree song that's in the series, it's in the movies, you see where that comes from and you see the meaning behind that song in this book, as well as like his hatred for mockingjays, and it just explains so much as to why he hates Katniss. Not just because she's a symbol of hope and she's starting a revolution and whatnot, but there's like a lot more to it than just that. This kind of explains that. So I like that we have a lot of, ooh, a cat. Sorry. God. I got a little excited. Yeah, so I really did enjoy a good amount of stuff in here. Things I did not enjoy. Some of the writing was weird. I mean, I liked I think the first two parts, but the third part was very rushed and it did not go anywhere where I like wanted it to go. It just kind of lost me by like the third act, and as well as the romance. I really hated the romance in this book. I think I kind of get why Suzanne Collins did it, to try and show you what a psychopath is, because the romance is very possessive in here and it's like not healthy, and I did not like that. But that's just who Snow is. But I think I would have liked it better if it was more of a friendship rather than a romance, though. If he was like possessive of a friendship. I don't know, I didn't like the romance at all. I also just really didn't like the ending because I want to know what happened to Lucy. I feel like we never get that answer, and I understand that we don't want Snow to know what happened to Lucy, but as a reader, I would have liked a little epilogue or something that's from Lucy's perspective to see where she is, how she ended up, what happened to her, because I need answers. But overall, I did actually quite enjoy this. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Who knows, that might change by the end of the year, but as of right now, it's a 4-star. The next books, let's talk about my 2019 releases, because another thing I'm doing this year is I try to read a 2019 release each month to try and catch up on books that I meant to get to last year. So the first one I have to talk about is Color Outside the Lines. This is a collection of short stories about love, edited by Sangu Mandana. So this is a collection of short stories about interracial love and LGBT love, and literally every type of love that is not the normal kind of love between a white man and a white woman. This is everything but that. So I definitely appreciate the diversity. I love seeing that. However, a lot of these stories for me were just kind of boring or were just okay. There were some I really didn't like. There was one I really loved. I definitely think my favorite one in here, because it like made me cry, is The Agony of a Heart's Wish by Samira Ahmed. After reading that, I was like, I definitely want to read some books by Samira Ahmed. But overall, it was more of just like an okay kind of thing. Like, I'm glad I read it, I'm happy I read it, but none of them were really memorable for me. So I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. And then the other 2019 release that I read was To Hell with the Hustle by Jefferson Bethke. I like Jefferson Bethke. I've watched some of his YouTube videos. I've read his other book, Jesus is Greater Than Religion. I really like him. By the way, he writes a lot of religious nonfiction books. So if religious nonfiction is not your jam, you can skip. This I DNF'd. I could not finish this book. It was so boring, And to be honest, I don't even really know what it was about. It was like he was saying a lot of words, but they just weren't making sense. It was like really slow paced, and it just felt like he was also using a lot of words to explain something when he could have used like this many words. I don't know, I just felt like he was over explaining things, but at the same time not really making any sense with his over explanations. I did find like a few little nuggets. I don't know if you can see my tabs. So I did find like a few little nuggets here and there that I liked, but overall was not impressed with this. I still will give his like other books a try. I just would not recommend this one. So this I gave 1.5 stars. Now we're going to talk about my random picks for each month. I've been doing this thing where I just randomly pick a book out of my TBR bag. For June, I didn't do that. I didn't pick a book out of my TBR bag. Instead, I used a video. I did a book scavenger hunt video, and I used whatever book I found through the book scavenger hunt to be my random pick for the month. And so the one that was chosen for me was My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. I read Grady Hendrix's other book, Horror Store, and it was weird, but I like weirdly enjoyed it. So I was looking forward to this one because I've heard that this was like his best. Everyone loves this one the most. And also the concept just seems so cool. This is takes place in the 80s, in case you couldn't tell by the cover, which makes it look like a VHS horror 80s movie. And this is a horror 80s novel where we follow some teen girls. One of them gets possessed by the devil, I believe it is. Yeah, the devil. And it's just trying to get the devil out of her. But she's wreaking havoc on all her friendships, relationships, family, and stuff. And yes, there is an exorcism in it, hence the title. I actually didn't like it. And I'm so upset. I really wanted to love this book, and I thought I was going to. I thought this was going to be like at least a 4-star. But honestly, for a book that takes place in the 80s and it's about an exorcism and being possessed by the devil, I found it very boring. I feel like it didn't get exciting until the exorcism at the very, very end, like the last 30 pages. I was surprised at how bored I was reading this book. I almost DNF'd it because I just was so bored and tired of it. But I pushed through. And I think that's mainly because it's slow paced. It also was not as weird as I was expecting it to be. I don't know. From Grady Hendrix, I expect like these really weird, twisty-turvy stories. That's not what I got. I did like the characters though. I do think they had like good character arcs and a good character journey, but all the other characters I really didn't like. It was just the main two characters, Abby and Gretchen, whose storylines I really enjoyed reading. So overall it was just okay. I mean, I gave it 2.5 stars. And then my random pick for July, I did not film me picking this out of the TBR bag, but I promise you this is the one that I picked out. And that is Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Sepetys. I was very excited when I picked this out of the bag because I have been wanting to read a Ruta Sepetys book for so long. I also love historical fiction. It's one of my absolute favorite genres to read from, but I never read historical fiction. I was happy that I was being forced to read my favorite genre with an author I was like very excited to read from and knew I was gonna love, and I really did love Ruta Sepetys' writing. I'm gonna explain this story with what the author says in the back here, because this takes place during a certain time. Okay, so the nations of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia disappeared from maps in 1941 and did not reappear until 1990. As this is a story seldom told, Ruta wanted to give a voice to the hundreds of thousands of people who lost their lives during Stalin's cleansing of the Baltic region. So this takes place during World War II, and we follow a girl, Lena, and her brother and her mother. They are taken in the middle of the night. Oh, they live in Lithuania, by the way. They are taken in the middle of the night by the Soviet police, and they are put into cattle cars and sent to labor camps. They were separated from their father in the very, very beginning. And it's just kind of this story, this really like heartbreaking yet beautifully written story about a time in history that is true, and some of these things did actually happen. She interviewed people who went through this, and so it was definitely hard to read at times, knowing that these were things that actually happened, and this is a part of our history that is, you know, one of the harsher things to learn about your history. Definitely glad this book exists. I really did enjoy this story. This was going to be a 5-star until the ending. I was really loving this story. I was loving all of the characters. I was loving the journey. I was flying through this book because I was just absolutely loving everything about this. But the ending for me just felt anticlimactic, or it didn't feel like an ending to me. I was also just very confused. I still am not quite sure what exactly happened to our main character, Lena. Also, I want to know what happened to Andreas. That was his name, right? Andreas? Oh, the romance in this was so good too. I'm still not 100% sure what happened to Andreas. I just really hope that it was a happy ending, because that's what I want. I want a happy ending for Lena. Overall, really enjoyed this. I definitely can't wait to read more of Ruta Sepetys books. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. Now we're going to move on to Shakespeare. Another goal of mine for life, I guess a bucket list thing, is to read every single one of Shakespeare's works. So I've been working on that for the past year and a half now. So by doing that, I read one Shakespeare play or Shakespeare work every single month. So let's talk about those two that I read. The one that I read in June was his sonnets. Going into this, was not expecting a whole bunch. I was just expecting, I guess, like a few little, like, I guess, love poems or whatever. I was not expecting it to actually be a story. This was incredible. I 100% recommend reading Shakespeare's sonnets. I cried my eyes out a couple of times. I smiled, I was happy. Like, this took me on a journey. So the first, like, 3 parts of the book are about his romance with this man and all the ups and downs and the things that they go through throughout this romance. And it's heartbreaking and also so wonderful. The last part is, a lot of people say it's love, but it's not love. It's lust for this woman. So if this is Shakespeare, Shakespeare was bisexual. Love it. That was something I actually really enjoyed about this book, was the fact that you can tell when he's talking about love and when he's talking about lust, because the way he was talking about the woman was very different from the way he was talking about the way he felt about the man. I liked the difference in the contrast between those two. The only issue I think I had with this was the fact that it was a little too long. There were a couple of sonnets, like, back to back, where I felt like they were just saying the same thing and they were repeating. But overall, really enjoyed this. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. And then the last Shakespeare play that I read was The Merchant of Venice. I actually quite enjoyed this one. At the time, like, for the month of July, I read a lot of very, like, hard-hitting books and impactful books, and I needed something a little light and comedic, and this is another comedy of Shakespeare's that I wanted to read. And I wouldn't say it's funny, like, I didn't really laugh at it, but, like, the themes and the tone of the book were definitely lighthearted and comedic. In this play, we follow Antonio. Am I right? Yes. Antonio, who is this, like, very wealthy guy, and he's a good person. He owns a lot of trading ships, which is like where he gets all this money from. And he does, like, loan money to people every now and then and, like, never charges interest. Like, he's a good person. His friend Bassanio needs to take out a loan, and so, but he needs a co-signer on the loan because he is not a very rich man. And so he asks his friend Antonio to be the co-signer. They take the loan from Shylock, who is the villain in this story. He is very notorious for charging high interest rates, really, like, taking advantage of people and stealing their money and whatnot. But they're also, Shylock and Antonio are also, like, arch nemesis. And so when Antonio is signing, like, a co-signer for a loan for his friend, Shylock decides that instead of charging interest, if the money is not paid back within 3 months, he will take a pound of flesh from Antonio, like, off of Antonio's body. But Antonio's like, this is funny, like, whatever, ha ha ha. That's not like a real thing, it's just a joke, but also like, I'll definitely be giving you the money within 3 months. Like, that's not a big deal. So then Bassanio goes to another town and marries this woman that he's been in love with for a while. I also just really loved the female characters, by the way. Like, what was her name? Portia. I loved Portia, and I love the whole like game that men had to play to win her hand in marriage, in a sense. Like, they had to pick a box, and if they chose the right box, then they got to marry her. But like, every guy was choosing the wrong box. I loved that part of the story. It was so funny. Anyway, so back to the story. But then Antonio's ships all sink. Every single one of them. What a coincidence. So he now doesn't have the money to pay back Shylock, and Shylock is demanding a pound of flesh from Antonio. That is essentially the premise of the story. So I actually really did enjoy the story and the plot, and it was very fun, and I loved the use, Shakespeare always uses in all of his plays, but I really liked it in this one, the use of disguise. The one issue I had with it, and it is a pretty big issue, because something with this book definitely didn't age well, and that is the anti-Jewish sentiments in this. They constantly like make fun of him and bully him because he is Jewish, and they keep calling him a villain and a horrible person because he is Jewish. And it's just a lot of anti-Jewish sentiments in this book, which definitely did bring it down. But overall, I enjoyed it. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Now, the other books I'm going to talk about they don't really have a theme with them. They're just other books that I read and wanted to read in the month. So the first book I have here is White Fragility. This is by Robin DiAngelo. Use this as a way to educate myself on the Black Lives Matter movements and racism and everything that's happening in the world. But this focuses on white fragility, like why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. This was definitely an eye-opening book. I really enjoyed this book a lot. I do think this is a really good start to learning about racism and systemic racism and all of that stuff, and how white people have been contributing to it for years without even realizing it. I think this was definitely a great beginning point for those things. I feel like this is more a book for white people, because the author, she is white, and she keeps referencing the reader, the audience of this book, as a white person. Trying to make it more like, you have done these things without realizing it. This is how you work on those things. So I would definitely recommend this more for white people to read, to really open your eyes. But yeah, I really highly recommend this book. I really loved it. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Another book I read was The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olayida Eguiano, also known as Gustavus Vasa. I have been wanting to read this book for years. Years. There is a movie that's one of my all-time favorite movies of life. It's called Amazing Grace. It's a movie about the abolition of slavery in Europe, or in the United Kingdom. And one of the characters in that movie is Olayida Eguiano. And in that movie, they did talk about how he wrote a book about his life and published it. And it was like it was a big bestseller. It was also just like a big deal that an African-American man published a book in the 1700s, when slavery was still going on. So he was like one of my favorite characters in that movie, and I've always just wanted to know about his life and learn more about him. And oh my god, he's so interesting. So this follows him from when he was a very young child living in Africa, and all the customs of his culture in Africa were interesting to read about as well. But when he was young, he was stolen, kidnapped, and sold into slavery. And he talks about his time in slavery, how he became a free man, and basically started like a business, and also how like religion really affected his his life. Like, he became a very religious Christian man. It was very interesting. I highly recommend this. This did take a lot longer to read than I expected. It's like 150 pages, but it took me like 3 weeks to read because I felt like after reading one chapter, I had to just stop. I had to just set it down, put it aside, and just really soak in what was being said in every single chapter. This is actually free. This book that I purchased was not free because I really wanted a hard copy of this book because I tabbed it like crazy and I highlighted it and I even wrote in the margins. Like, I was so into this book. But this is public domain, so you can read it for free online. So highly recommend this. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Then I also read Don't Call Us Dead by Danez Smith. This is a poetry collection about police brutality, being queer and black in America, as well as deals with talking about HIV and AIDS. I liked this poetry collection. I wouldn't say I loved it. And the things that he said were very powerful and complex, and I liked that a lot. I just think for me, poetry, this isn't my kind of poetry that I'm used to, I guess. I don't know. I've never really been into poetry, but the poetry I tend to like, I think, is considered Instagram poetry. This was definitely not Instagram poetry. It's definitely more intelligent than that. But for me, that just made a lot of the poems not very memorable for me. But I did still enjoy this. So I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. Another book I read that I know a lot of people love, but for me it just wasn't as impactful as I wanted it to be for me. But that is Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. A lot of people love this book, and I totally see why. I love the things that were being said in here. This is another book that deals with like racism, police brutality, all those things that are going on in the world. So I loved the points that he made and the things that were being said. But for me, the writing just was very boring. It felt like it was too intelligent for me. It just felt like I was reading and listening to like a very smart person, and a lot of the things were just like going over my head. But again, I still really liked it and I still would recommend this to people. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. So another book I read was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. I have heard so many wonderful things about this author and about this book. I was very looking forward to it. And after reading The Black Flamingo, which was a book told in verse, I was like, I want to try more books that are told in verse. Hence why I went to this one. I do think, however, this book was a little bit too hyped up for me because I was expecting a lot, and when I read it, it didn't quite live up to that hype for me. We follow Xiomara. She is a Latinx woman, a Latinx teen, oh my god. She is a Latinx teen living in Harlem, just living her life. She has very, very religious parents. That comes into play a lot in this book. She also really loves slam poetry and is very into writing in her English class. It definitely has very important things to say, and I like the things that are brought up, and I think the writing is very beautiful. I loved her her use of writing in verse. I don't know how to explain it. But I really liked it a lot. But I will say the main character did frustrate me a lot. Anyway, I still enjoyed it, and I still want to check out more by Elizabeth Acevedo. So I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I want to talk about is The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. Oh my goodness. This is an adult fantasy that centers around Middle Eastern folklore and mythology. This takes place in Cairo, Egypt, which Egypt is one of those like places I really want to visit. Like, it's in my top 5 countries I want to visit. The landscape and the atmosphere in this book are absolutely gorgeous and wonderful. So really, really enjoyed this book a lot and this story. We follow Nari. She's kind of like a con woman, and then she accidentally does a ritual that brings a jinn warrior to her, and then they end up going on this adventure to find the City of Brass. We also, she'll be safe from the Ifrit, and then we also follow Prince Ali, who is a prince for the City of Brass, and we see all of like the politics that are happening in that world, and like a rebellion you feel and see this rebellion that's like festering and like ready to start. I really enjoyed the story. Like I said, I really enjoyed the story a lot. The things I didn't like were the romance. It felt a little rushed, and honestly, I just wasn't really getting quite into the romance that I think we were supposed to. And then some of the times it was very difficult to get into the world because the world building felt so complex that there was like a lot going on, and it was hard to keep track of all the different things, all the different characters, it was just like a lot to take in, and I felt like, again, things were being rushed to explain those things. But overall, I still really enjoyed it, and I'm so excited for the second book. I think I gave this 4 stars, right? Yes, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. And that is it for my reading wrap up. I really need to get going because I am running late. But I also have a movie wrap up and my life wrap up for the months of June and July. Please go also check those out, and I will see you guys later with more videos. Bye. Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me. Good Lord. I just ate pancakes.